Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at working with Azure deployment templates in PowerShell and VS Code. So we're going to take a look at some of the common ways we can use PowerShell to create objects, resources, if you will, that are in Azure using something referred to as deployment templates in PowerShell and be able to modify those templates using some type of code editor. We'll just be using Visual Studio Code for that. All right. So with that being said, let's switch over to my desktop here so we can kind of see what's going on. And so first of all, let me just kind of look at a typical Azure portal here. So this is the graphical portal. If you go to portal.azure.com, this is part of the Azure Resource Manager collection of tools, of which you have the portal, you have the Azure modules available through PowerShell, and you also have the Azure command line interface or Azure CLI. So all of these interfaces allow me to configure objects, resources within Azure. So if I first, look at a resource, so in today's demo, we'll be working with virtual networks because they're kind of the smallest and very quick to work with. So if I happen to open up like a virtual network, with pretty much any object you create in Azure, if you create it however you create it, if you use the graphical program, the Azure portal, if you use PowerShell, if you use Azure CLI, basically for each object, if you go down to the bottom, there is something called export template, which if you create it, will give you a JSON formatted piece of code that describes the settings for whatever that Azure resource is. So if I happen to look at this, I could see, like for instance, notice the name here, VNet2. I could see that there's a subnet configured called default. For the virtual network, I could see the address prefix there. For the subnet, I could see the address prefix there. So you can find out the different pieces of information that were used to configure the resource when it was made. And this can be kind of a building block for you if you wanted to create other resources using a lot of the same settings that are in this resource. So if maybe you have to create 10 virtual networks, you might create one using the portal and then kind of steal this JSON configuration file here to be the basis, the model that you're going to use to build the rest of your virtual networks from. So you could create, I don't know, maybe one VM and then use a lot of the same settings when you're creating your other VMs. Okay. So create one, use that as kind of like the model, grab the template for it, and then use that to build your other resources that are of the same type. Right. Now you could also grab a template if you're interested. If you go look at like your resource groups, for instance, let's say I've got this Res2 resource group that I have a lot of stuff in. There's also an export template that would describe every resource that was in the resource group. So that can also be a good benefit as well if you wanted to duplicate everything that was in one resource group to go ahead and do that for, let's say, creating a whole bunch of new objects that are in a different resource group. Right? So here's kind of everything described in this JSON format if you wanted to go ahead and look through that. Now, let's say though you didn't want to, let's say you didn't have an object created already that you could do an export template for. If you go out in Google, you will find something out there called Azure Quick Start Templates, which if you go into that, there's like a lot of templates that are already there that describe a lot of the common resources and objects that you'll find within Azure. So for instance, if I was maybe looking for a virtual network, I can plug that in and see what comes up in the results here. And there's 127 that have that in it somewhere. So we could kind of go look here and virtual network NAT, create a WordPress site in a virtual network. Um, let's see here, Azure Databricks, create a service hub. But notice like this one right here, create a virtual network with 2 subnets. So if I open that up, you do get some buttons here to deploy into Azure, the public version of Azure, and there's also a button here to deploy to Azure Gov if you're using the version of Azure and the data centers that go with the government and the military. You could look at that. But if you just wanted to see the template itself, you can click Browse Code, and that would open it up in GitHub. And we could see from GitHub here, the actual template itself would be this file right here, this Azure Deploy.json. So if I kind of click on that, I can literally see the code right here that makes up that template and kind of use that as the basis for creating a virtual network. So I could either steal this code or I could go back to here, click this deploy to Azure, and then it would pop up an authentication box for you to log in so it knows what Azure subscription to make it in and stuff like that. And what's kind of cool about the templates is not everything is hard coded. Like kind of like when we're making a script, right? There's parameters that go along with the script. So you could see like there's a virtual network name, the address prefix, the subnet name, the subnet prefix for subnet 1 and subnet 2 here. So, and the location, so these are all things that you would be asked if you wanted to deploy the template. Okay, so that's again usually a perk when you're talking about using deployment templates with Azure is the fact that a lot of the common values are all hard coded and it will ask you for the things that are going to be different about that object. So maybe, I want a whole bunch of virtual networks. What's going to be different between them? Well, the name of them and maybe like the addresses that they use. So maybe that's all I want to get asked. So with a deployment template, you can kind of hard code a lot of the values that'll stay the same through different objects and then have it prompt you for just the few things you want to change when you're making a new object, right? So this template can be used, and if you want the straight code, I mean, you could just kind of highlight it, copy it out. There is a raw button here, which would give you just the raw code. So I could just do a Control A, Control C, and then copy that into a text editor to modify, as I need, if you will. So if I wanted to do something like that. Okay, but for our purposes here, let's go back and let's go find that virtual network that I had here, VNet2. And that is again, nothing fancy virtual network. I think it has made it with the defaults. And it has a single subnet in it that happens to be called default. Right? So that's kind of the basis that I'm going to want to use here. So I'm going to go to export template. It's going to make that template for me. And then notice along the top here, notice there is a download button, there's an add to library, there's a deploy, and there is a visualize template. So if you wanted to take the template as is, you could go ahead and add it to a library. So if you kind of, search your resources within Azure here, there is something called a template specs that it would be put into. And so if you do an add to library, it'll show up in this template specs area where you could then open it up and then have the ability to kind of play around with it a bit here. So you could, the version that's here, okay, was the one that was added when I looked at the virtual network. And if I wanted to modify it, change it around, there is a create new version where you could go ahead and edit the template code to maybe change it for what you wanted. Right? So they can live in Azure if you wanted to do that. Right? So for me though, I wanted to bring the template down to my local computer here, the one that I'm kind of recording this video on. So let's go export template. Let it build the template up again here. And then we'll go ahead and select download. And that will go ahead and give me this downloaded as a zip file. Um, so I could then, open that up, grab the information out of here. Let's go copy that. And I have a folder set up here called Azure Demo. And we'll go put the files that we get into here. Right? So the parameters file is not really going to have a whole heck of a lot of stuff here. If I just kind of crack open Notepad, you could see that through the template, it made one parameter for us automatically called the virtual network's VNet2 name. I'm ultimately going to need more parameters in here, but that was the one that was created. And you'll see in the actual template itself here, if I just open this in Notepad real quick, again, it's the same parameter that was created. Right? And then in the resources, that's where the information is actually being used to create objects here. So notice the name of the virtual network uses parameters and the name of that parameter. So notice that matches the name of that. Right? So this is the file we want to modify to be able to create new virtual networks using a lot of the same settings that were in this existing virtual network. Okay, so with that, I want to actually pull this into a script editor, not just Notepad. So let me go ahead and open File here, C: Azure Demo, and we'll do this template JSON. Right, so we'll go ahead and open. Maybe close that welcome out. Okay, and we'll go ahead and we'll edit the code within here. Right. Now for this code, I am going to need to create basically 4 parameters. Because when you create a virtual network, I want the name of the virtual network, the address space that the virtual network's in, then you need at least one subnet, and what address space that subnet is going to be in. All right, so those are the modifications we're going to need to make. So you don't have to utilize their name here, for their parameter. Um, so what you could do is maybe simplify it or make it something that would be easier for you to work with. So maybe, for me, I never call it a virtual network. I always call it a VNet. And maybe I'll make a parameter called the VNet name. Right? So now that that's changed, and I probably don't want it having a default value here. So I want to get rid of that. So we'll get rid of that piece like so. And because now there's only one thing defined here, type string, I'll probably just bring that all onto one line just to kind of make it, a little easier to, easier to work with here. So or easier to read, I guess I should say. There we go. And we'll bring the closing right there. All right. So that would be one parameter created. So now I can do a comma on that, and we'll go ahead and create another 3 parameters out of this just by pasting, right? Something like that. Okay, now, so for VNet, I need a VNet address. I need a subnet name, and I'm going to need a subnet address, right? Like so. Okay, and they're all going to be strings. All right, so that's the type we're going to be working with. All right. So let's see here, make sure I've got all of that correct. Oh yeah, and for whatever reason, the ISE when you're doing types, it likes it to be lowercase for whatever reason. That's kind of a, I don't know, weird thing in the ISE. I should have remembered to do that. I'm sorry, the ISE, VS Code. I'm sorry, the ISE would not care. So we got subnet name, and then we've got subnet address. Okay, there we go. And it looks like, okay, that's not giving me any formatting issues now, so we're good there. Okay, so now what we want to do is down in resources here, we want to go ahead and like right here, name, this would be the name of the virtual network. For the parameters, we now need to put in the correct parameter that we want to use, which would be VNet name. All right. And so that's fine there. And then the address prefix right here, we would want to go ahead and change that out. So it now used the VNet address parameter. Right? So we would want to put into the double quotes here a bracket, the word parameter, open parenthesis, quote. We want VNet address, close the quote, close the parenthesis, and it already got the bracket for me. All right. So that would now, instead of having a hard-coded value, it would use whatever value was supplied when we run the template, when we deploy the template, right? So that's kind of the whole point of making it a parameter up here, is so that is supplied when you are deploying the template. So probably the biggest thing is make sure you don't typo anything when you're using it. All right. So we're also going to use this same setup here, where we see, like for instance, on subnet, the name here I don't want default. I want to put in my parameter, which would be not VNet address here, but subnet name. All right, so I want to use that value into that area here. All right. And so now I kind of go and scan through. Oh, one more spot here. So right there, we're going to want to change that because that's, again, that's a hard-coded value. So we're going to want to change that to the subnet address. So we're utilizing that parameter there. Right? Now, if we look within the configuration, you'll notice here, again, this is kind of the downside of when we're editing a template from an object that's already there, is you kind of have to go through and kind of do a little check of it to make sure that if you changed one of the parameters like I did up here, you know, from the original, notice it's still being used there, right? So we're going to want to change this to VNet name. So that's using the proper one. And here, it also has hard-coded what the name of the subnet was from the place where we got this template from. So I would want to change that instead of default. I would want the parameter here, right? So that way we're using that value here. So we'll try putting that in, all right, and see what we have here. All right, so I don't need, again, I want to match the format of parameter here. So I want to get rid of some of the structure here. That looks good, I believe. All right, so we got that. All right, so now keep going down. And again, for the subnet, it does show the subnet prefix down here again. So we would need to fix that. So right here where I have this, go ahead, grab that, and again, replace that down there. And then on the name, again, it's using the old parameter name. So remember, we need to change that around to VNet name. All right, and then same thing down here. Again, change that to VNet name. All right, and then one last thing here, I think, default. So it's doing, it looks like a concatenation here. So that means it's combining whatever the text values were for the name, and then it's throwing /default in there. So we're not going to need that. So what we'll do is we'll close the quote because we need the /, and then do another comma, and then we'll add the subnet name. So let's grab that and substitute that out for default here. There you go, something like that. So it's making a name that has the virtual network name and then a / and then whatever the name of the subnet is. So that should do it for what we're looking for. So I don't think any. Oh yeah, I think the problems were it doesn't like the API version here. So that's happening twice, so no big deal there. So I'll go ahead and save this. All right. So that should take care of the edits utilizing the parameters that I have here. Okay. So modified the one that was there, changed it to what it was to VNet name, and then introduced these three other parameters, and then utilized them where I wanted to use those values. So subnet name, subnet address, um, yeah, subnet name, subnet address there, and so on. And the other things in the template I'm leaving as hard configured. So like the location, I'm fine with that. These, service endpoint settings, endpoint policies, service link, I don't care about those. So whatever they were set for in VNet 2, I'm going to go with the same settings in whatever new network I'm going to create here. Okay. So now we have the template. What we need to do is deploy the template. Okay. So in my PowerShell console here, I do have it already logged into Azure. So I've gone ahead and logged into it ahead of time here. And what we're in, let me change the directory over to where my code is. All right, so I've got my template.json. So that's ultimately what I want to deploy. So now to go do that, we're going to do new AZ resource group deployment. The resource group name, I'm putting this in, I have a resource group called res2 that I'm going to use. And the template file is going to be that template.json. The // means it's looking in the current directory, so where my PowerShell prompt's currently at. Okay? Now, once you do that part, now all of the parameters, if you look up here, all of the parameters will now be available and I can configure the values on them. So for instance, I had a parameter called VNet name, and notice a tab completes. That's kind of cool. So maybe we'll make a network. What do we want to call it here? I don't know, maybe we'll call it VNet, I don't know, VNet 5. The VNet address Again, I'm putting this in quotes because it needs to be seen as a string value, and normally a bunch of numbers are not. So that's what I want for that. Then we've got the subnet name. We'll just call this subnet 1. And then the subnet address, let's do 172.16.1.0/24. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So go ahead and run. And I probably have a formatting issue somewhere. It's not uncommon. It's the first time I've edited this. Um, and we'll go ahead and take a look and see what the heck is going on here. Okay, so let me go back to the code here. Let's go to here, and let's see. Let's leave the error message again. So let's see. Template resource. Didn't like this concat line here. Okay, so let's go look at that. And again, I probably just did a typo somewhere. So if we go look here, let's see. Oh, I think I see what it is. Notice here where it's parameters, VNet name, and here I just have parameter. And let me change that to an S. Should be parameters, which I copy pasted that a bit here. Let me see. Oh yeah, I messed that up there. I messed that up there. Parameters VS name, we got that. Man, stupid mistake. Oh well, shall we say? Stuff happens. Parameters and parameters. There we go. So I think we got everything. Let's see. So let's save this and let's go try this again. So we utilize the same settings. Go ahead and run. And it's not choking on it. So, yeah, looks like we got something there. Um, the template function parameter is not valid. All right. I probably typoed somewhere again there, but it did look like, oh, template failed. Okay. So let's go see if we need to, oh, yeah, I missed that one here. Parameters. All right. So let's go through this one more time. Parameters, VNet name, parameters, VNet address, parameters, subnet name, parameters. All right. Yeah, the danger of hand editing, right? All right. So save it, and this one should be good. Go give her a shot. All right, and there we go. So notice provision status succeeded. Cool. All right, so now if we kind of go look at our virtual networks, I should see if I refresh the view here, there's a VNet 5. Open it up. Subnets, there's subnet 1. All right, cool. So that gets that part of it ready to go. All right. So now, what if I wanted to create a lot of virtual networks? Would I have the ability to do that? And the answer is yeah, you could. Right? That is in the cards to do. So, for instance, here I have this CSV file that real simply has VNet name, VNet address, subnet name, subnet address, right? So I have, imagine I have this data set here and I want to create virtual networks from all of these, right? So could I put a script together that, works with this? And absolutely you could. Right? So if I wanted to, I could, let's go ahead and maybe uh, do a new file here. And let's maybe say we'll pull that in. So maybe we'll do like a get content. And this is C colon Azure demo data CSV. All right, and maybe we'll store that into a variable $vnets equals. All right, so that would be the information that we would need. Well, I do vets, vnets. So let's do something like that, and that's giving me because it's not used yet. All right. So then we will go take this line of code right here that made the virtual network, and we could bring that in, um, and maybe we'll wrap that around a for each. So we'll do for each, maybe $vnet and $vnets. All right, and then we'll open up a script block. And then down towards the end here, I'll close off the script block. All right. So now I'm going to use some backticks here just to line up all the parameters. So that way they're all kind of lined up together. Yeah, there we go. Oops, no, I want to do that. Messed it up. Okay, get that, and get that. Okay, so there we go. So now, um, what we uh, what we want to do here is we're going to um, bring these. Oh, I missed one more here. My bad. We have the name, the address, the name, the address. All right. So the template file again. I could, yeah, let's just C colon Azure demo backslash. Right. So again, I mean, you could make a parameter out of that. Um, and then here for the VNet name, I'd want to pull from the objects that were coming in from the CSV. So that would be $VNet dot what was the name of it? VNet name, right? Let's see, VNet name, right? Yeah, that's what we're looking for. All right. Um, so then VNet address, subnet name, subnet address. All right. Oops, that's not what I wanted to look at. All right. So dollar VNet name. Let's just use. So that would be VNet address, right? And this one would be subnet name. And lastly here, subnet address, right? So we've got, again, for each object coming in, so VNets would have multiple objects in it coming from the CSV file. Grab the first object, and then we're using that to feed in to this this commandlet here, the VNet name, address, subnet name, subnet address. So it's grabbing those properties out of the object that came back from the CSV. All right. So that should work there. Let's go ahead and save this. Azure demo, deploy script .ps1. All right, so we have that there. And so this should now grab all that information. So again, I'm using this console here because I'm already logged in. So let's go deploy that, and we get a whole bunch of errors in here. So let's see. Um, right, so doesn't like that. So we just want to see, which is probably me just doing a typo. Which again, it's got to love the part of live code here. So let's go ahead and see what's going on. Okay, so if we go have a look here, so I'm looking for typos. VNet, VNet, VNet name, VNet address. So that's all correct. Oh geez, here we go. Get content is going to bring this data in as a bunch of string objects without making anything out of it. So that should have been an import CSV. Probably when I was first typing this out, some of you watching the video were probably screaming at me, but remember, this isn't live. Probably screaming at me like, Mike, what are you doing? So import CSV. Yeah, let's do that. That should make a difference. All right. So let's go try that again. And it is thinking about it. And succeeded on VNet 10. So that means it should keep going through the rest. So should make VNet 20 and VNet 30, I think is what I named them. Okay, so there's VNet 20. And VNet 30. All right, cool. So if we go over and have a look at the virtual networks, refresh the view, there's 10, 20, and 30. There's 30 right there. Okay, so that was the code we could use. Let me zoom it up a little bit. So bring the data in via CSV, work through each one at a time. That was for me doing testing there. You kind of ignore that. I had the video paused for a moment here to figure that out. That's what kind of let me see that I messed that up. But anyway, and then there we go. All right, so feeding in the different parameters using the property names that were in the CSV file. So if we wanted to go ahead and utilize that. So again, if you wanted to see the CSV again, it wasn't anything fancy. All right. So just make sure you import CSV and don't do a get content. That would probably work a lot better. So anyway, so that's working with some deployment templates, making your own, editing it, adding some parameters, and being able to deploy it out with PowerShell. All right. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. And we will see you in the next one. So have a good one, everyone.